will be posted on our the recording will be posted on our website sometime over the next couple of weeks should you want to check back if there's anything that you didn't understand or wanted to review. Welcome everyone. Again, my name is Kristen Kastner. I am the Indicator 14 lead at the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in Everett. I am here doing this webinar with our happy little consultant, Rachel Wilkinson, who works for Crescent Bend Consulting. They are our vendor working on this project with us and in support of collecting all of this data from you and from your exhibitors. So Rachel, say hello.
Hi everybody, good to see you all.
Well, I think I can probably pop into oh, wait a minute, one more person I wanted to introduce is Ariella Venn, who is will be working more closely with districts on a lot of the data collection questions or issues. We will be sharing her email address later on. But these are the three most likely people you'll need to reach out to when you're doing this year's data collection. Okay, Rachel, next slide. So the agenda for today's meeting, we want to give you a general overview on Indicator 14. I know there are a lot of districts who do this every year, a lot of special ed directors who have a lot of experience in doing Indicator 14 data collection, but I also know there's a lot of newbies. So we want to make sure we just did an overview of why we do this every year, what data we collect, how we collect it, and what we do with the information that we collect, which is, I think, the point is to get you guys as set up as possible to do this data collection during the data collection period, which kicks off today, May the 4th, and goes through September the 25th. Then we'll talk to you again about how to prepare for giving the online survey. There's a few things we recommend districts do before they start contacting people to fill in their surveys, how to administer the online survey. There's a couple of different ways that the surveys can be filled out and by different kinds of people. And so we'll run through all of that. Then just a few little tips and reminders. I think every year I get a lot of requests from districts saying, you know, how do we do this? We didn't do this as well as we could have last year. Here's a few little tips and reminders on what to do and how to do things. And then a quick little wrap up. The idea is to get this done in an hour if we can. So we'll head straight forward for that. So basic communications updates. So this morning, so the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education communicates with special ed directors via MailChimp. So a lot of the major communications will go out. There was a communication that went out this morning with full instructions on how to do Indicator 14 and a reminder on how to do Indicator 14. So hopefully your special ed directors have them, and that is really how we communicate generally with the special ed directors, and we ask the directors to forward on a lot of this information, as we know there are a lot of other people in the districts working on Indicator 14. Second is the Indicator 14 resources. We have posted in the last week a large amount of our usual large amount of Indicator 14 resources, a full instruction on how we recommend to do Indicator 14 data collection, tips and tricks, those kinds of issues. It's kind of a long document. It can be a little overwhelming, but I really recommend you read through that before you do anything on Indicator 14, because I think it'll save a lot of time and a lot of effort in the end. And then Dropbox. So the educator, the security portal that DESE has, we have uploaded to all the Indicator 14 districts a list of their 24-25 exhibitors, which should be in Dropboxes. They were in last week or the week before, and our Rachel will go through all of this with you. But really, that is the best place to start on a lot of these things, because it'll give you the list of who we think your exhibitors are based on the last year's SIMS data or previous year's SIMS data. So if you have any corrections, there's a whole system, there's a way of making those corrections and sending them and submitting them to us so that we can make sure that your extras lists are correct. So that you're not reaching out to students you don't need to reach out to and putting that kind of effort into those kind of functions. And and uh, sorry, I just got a little bit pushed away. And to start with, and if you there'll be Rachel will go through what if you can't reach any of those functions, what if you can't, what if you're having problems with finding that Dropbox extra list, that will be covered in this webinar. I see a raised hand. What we're going to do, I think, is we'll take questions at the end so we don't confuse everyone, because there is so much information on this webinar, and so that we're not previewing things that we're going to be answering later on. So for that, I send this over to my dear colleague, Rachel Wilkinson at Crescent Bend Consulting, who, again, is supporting a lot of the district work on all of this. And she will take you through a lot of these projects, all these things. I will pop them back in on the end to do a summary for you all. Thanks, Scott. Right.
Thank you, Kristen. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here with you today. So we're going to go through some details about what Indicator 14 is and then what this survey will look like when you actually start completing it with your exiting students for this reporting cycle. So the focus is to really prepare the students, of course, for success in their adult lives. That's the work that we're doing pre-K through age 22 so that they can go be successful in the world after school. So what we're going to have is Indicator 14 survey data to help you follow up with former students with IEPs within 1 year of them leaving high school, just to find out whether they have been engaged in employment or employment training, higher education, any of that information and those details to see what they're doing since leaving high school. And that gives us an indication of how successful programs are in preparing students for life beyond school. So what is Indicator 14? Well, at the district and state level, Indicator 14 is measuring the percent of students who exited secondary school but had IEPs in effect at the time they left school, and who within 1 year of leaving secondary school either enrolled in higher education, were competitively employed, or who had some other post-secondary education or training program that they attended, or was in other employment that may not be captured under the competitive employment definition. And if you're not familiar with that, you are in good company. And we will go into that a little bit more as we get later into the session, defining what competitive employment looks like. So how is Indicator 14 data collected? So your district is going to use an online survey, and we have it in several languages, as you can see here. And we have the link as well. This link is active that you'll be able to start using after today, after our webinar concludes. And the survey can be completed in multiple ways. So there's 3 ways we look at it. So a former student can complete the survey independently by themselves. You can have a district staff member complete the survey alongside the former student, or you can have a parent, guardian, or caregiver who has the information to complete the survey, and they can do that with or on the behalf of their former student who left high school 1 year prior. So when are Indicator 14 data due? All the data in the surveys must be completed by September 25th, 2026, so this coming fall. All online surveys must be completed by this date and submitted online, because we have to meet our federal reporting requirements that have really specific timelines of how long we can survey after a student exits. And that is why that September 25th date is used. So now we're going to go into preparing for the online survey. So what does that look like as you get started? Well, the first thing you're going to do is identify who the Indicator 14 survey team will be in your district, and then how you're going to train or orient them to this task and the materials. And so that's where you'll start, is that resource document library that's posted on the Indicator 14 website. There's a whole bunch of documents, as Kristen alluded to in there, but they are really helpful. They'll have a lot of what we're covering today. They'll also have resources for actually communicating with students or helping you strategically think through the survey, anything like that. There's a lot of resources available to you, so we encourage you to look at those. But of course, if you need anything else, you can certainly reach out and we'll give you that contact information as well. But when you're thinking about collecting the data, one of the things that's key for effective information gathering is to know who an exiter is. What do we mean when we use the term exiter? Because it's a strange phrase. So we're going to dig into what an exiter is. And then you'll need to know who your district's exiters are, and then how you're actually going to get in contact them to complete the survey. And then finally, you want to think through how you're going to administer the survey, whether you're going to do it at the district level, whether you're going to have students or families complete the survey, and then how are you going to ensure it gets submitted so that it can be included in your Indicator 14 data set for your school district. So we'll get to that first question of what is an exiter. So exiters are students with IEPs who exited in the 24-25 school year by graduating with a regular high school diploma or aging out of special education, and that's with or without a certificate of attainment, so either instance, or who dropped out of high school. And when we say dropout, what we mean is that the student didn't return for the 25-26 school year, but they had been expected to return. In those instances, that student would be considered a dropout, and they are going to be considered exiters for Indicator 14. And one note in here is that you must include in the survey process students who are in out-of-district placements. So those students must be a part of this as well. So determining who your district's exiters are. As Kristen mentioned, there's going to be an exiter list that'll be generated and submitted and available to you through Dropbox. This is going to be based on your SIMS data that was submitted in 2025. So this is information that the state collected through SIMS. Once your district's file is available, you can go to the DESE security portal. You'll go to Dropbox Central, and then you'll go to the Indicator 14 section. And from there, you can download and save that SIMS exiter file, but you want to make sure you save it securely because it does have personally identifiable information for students. So we just want to be careful about that.
And those exiter files are available in Dropbox now. So you should be able to go in today and see those exiter files.
So thank you, Kristen. Perfect. All right. So the next thing to talk about is confirming your exiter list. So those files that Kristen just mentioned are now available to you. You're going to want to go into those reports and actually validate everything. So you're going to use things like your contact information that you may have taken from your school district. The student contact information sheets may not have been used, but you should have other information that you may have used in the student's cumulative files. So maybe emergency contact information, anything like that. You really want to validate the students you have in your system who exited in the 24-25 school year and make sure that aligns with what the state has provided you based on SIMS data. Now, if you see any discrepancies, what we ask is that you create an Excel spreadsheet, and there's a resource that will be on the website to help you guide what that might look like. An Excel spreadsheet where you would list your district name and your OR code. And then we ask that you also provide the SACID, the name, and the birth date for any record you see a discrepancy with. And that means that by discrepancy, we mean either it looks inaccurate, the student shouldn't be included, or the student is missing but should be on the list and you need them to be added. And so that's what we'll ask you to do in this Excel spreadsheet, provide those details, and then indicate whether you're adding the student or removing them. And one of the things that really helps us is knowing the reason. So the reason for adding or removing the student, we do need that information in order to decide whether we can remove them or add them. It doesn't need to be detailed, but just enough information for us to understand why they're being added or removed. And then once you have this sheet put together, you can upload it in Dropbox in the Indicator 14 folder on the DESE security portal. And then we'll pull that down, make adjustments, reach out if we have any questions. And of course, you can always reach out to our team member, Ariel 11, who we just got to meet a little bit ago, and she will help you if you have any questions about students being added or removed. Ariel does have DESE's clearance to discuss that individual exeter information, so just know that that is all pre-approved and good to go.
One thing I want to point out, we get some requests from districts via email. We request that you do not share any personally identifiable information from students via email, which is why we're asking everyone to upload those things to Dropbox. So that is the idea of that's the way we propose to do it, so that we're not sending personal information over unsecured networks, which is what the internet is. So thank you.
All right, so compiling the exeter's contact information. So once you've done your review, identified any discrepancies, got those corrections squared away, then what we would ask you to do is use any of the forms, whether it's a student contact information forms or any other resources that were completed by students to get their contact information. And don't worry if you don't have any sort of designated forms. As I mentioned earlier, you can use things like emergency contact forms and other resources like that. All right, so next we're going to go into how to administer the online survey. And of course, the key is always to plan ahead so that you have a process and plan in place for how you're going to contact your exiters to make sure they get completed by that September 25th, 2026 deadline. So you want to think, how are you going to use points of contact? How are you going to use contact components? Do you want to use email, phone calls, mail, social media? Think through how often you're going to contact exiters. Will it be weekly, every 2 weeks? Does that change as you get closer to that September 25th final date? And then which district staff are going to be the points of contact reaching out to the exiters? And a note here, this has been observed through DESE's work as well as a national sort of process and best practice. Districts' response rates are often higher if exiters are contacted by staff they know and trust. So we encourage that all the time, that if there are staff that students are familiar with, that they would be the best people to be communicating with those students. All right. So to ensure that all the surveys are counted as complete, we're going to go through some things to consider. So when you're having your district staff complete the survey along with the student, there'll be an option where you can select I work for the district, and then you'll be prompted to enter the first and last name of the person who's supporting this, who works for the district, as well as their role. So that information is really helpful for us, and it probably would be very helpful for you all internally, just to know who the points of contact were so that you can follow up with people as needed. The other thing to keep in mind is that we have added for which district did you attend high school, a drop-down menu. So that is how any respondent will determine and select who or what district they attended. One thing to note, if a student isn't sure of the exact name of their district or the family member who might be completing this, there is an option to select other, and then the respondent can type in the relevant information. And one thing we do really want to urge you to do, because this will help when we're communicating to you the status of your surveys and their completion, is if you could please enter the former student's SACID if a school district staff member is completing the survey, because that will be incredibly helpful for us communicating with you about whether or not a student has completed a survey. All right, so planning your outreach. The procedure you use is really up to you. It's what makes the most sense and is most feasible in your district to sort of maximize the outcomes and the responses that you get. So some things that we suggest are that you mail or email your exiters before you start planning to call them, and maybe allow them a little time to complete the survey online first. So that at least can get some surveys maybe processed by people who want to do them independently. And then you could consider sending a follow-up letter or email about a week or two after to encourage completing that online survey. And then if more than a month has passed from the initial mailing and you're still not getting survey responses from certain students, then you might want to consider sending additional reminders that maybe staff will be reaching out to contact them, because that has been a successful leverage point for a lot of districts, is having the staff within the district actually reach out to the student to get that survey submitted. All right, one thing we do urge is that you make at least 3 attempts to reach the exiters. And what do we mean by attempts? Well, contact attempts would entail things like phone calls, emails, letters, maybe texts. And when you're calling, we do urge that you try different days of the week, maybe different times of day, especially if you're not getting responses. What we've seen is that districts with the higher response rates in the state, they tend to attempt outreach even more than 3 times to get in contact with exiters. So how will you know whether students have completed the online survey? So our team is going to send regular emails to your Indicator 14 district contact. Now, this is usually your special education administrator. And then we'll let you know which exiters have completed the survey by providing you the numbers, the counts, and then the SACIDs, if we have them, of the students who have completed the survey. That's why getting that SACID information, especially when districts are completing it, is really helpful. Obviously, students wouldn't have those details. But if you do want someone other than your district's special education administrator to get updates, then just let us know who the correct contact information is. And this will again be something that Ariel can support you with. But we do ask that if you email her to change that point of contact, you also copy IDEA data at mass.gov, because DESE needs to be aware of this as well, and that might help them with making updates in other places if you need. So in terms of what you'll receive from us, we're going to be sending each district's special education director or point of contact a notification every other week through August, and then starting on a weekly basis beginning September 1 through the 25th. And we'll request that all communications be shared with the appropriate staff at the district level, just knowing that some of this could be confidential or personally identifiable information. So we will be sending those communications to you again every 2 weeks through August, and then every week starting September 1st. And if you do have any questions, again, always feel free to reach out to us. Ariel's a great place to start, and she can usually help us triage anything and get to the right people if she can assist with the question. All right, so now we're going to go through a few reminders. I had promised that we were going to go through the definition of competitive employment, and that is exactly what we'll do. So when we talk about competitive employment, it's a federally defined term. What we're talking about are youth who worked for pay that was at or above the minimum wage, but was not less than the customary wage, and that where they worked, they received the same level of benefits that the employer provides for same or similar work performed by individuals who do not have disabilities. So there's no difference in the benefits. This would also be a job in the competitive labor market on a full-time or a part-time basis. It would need to be in a setting with others who are not disabled or an integrated setting. And competitive employment is also inclusive of military employment. So when you hear that term, these are the components worth considering to determine whether a student's employment was competitive or not. So let's talk a little bit about improving response rates. So there's a lot of benefits. One of them is so that you better understand where your former students are and what things they might need to help them, and what your students of now might need to better prepare them for life after school. And when you hear from more students, you get a better and more accurate picture that more proportionally gives you data. When you have low response rates, you might be extrapolating that information for 1 or 2 students to a population of 50, and that's not probably going to give you the most accurate picture of what your students are doing after they exit. And the statewide report that you get, the district level reports as well, they'll be more complete. You'll have more confidence in that data. And with that data, I think that really helps as a leverage point to make better decisions, either academically or supporting students after they exit, whatever that might look like. So one of the keys, I know we've mentioned this, and I'll probably mention it again before we jump off this call, is using interviewers whom former students know and trust. That piece, that personal connection, can be incredibly valuable to increase your response rates. And then we also recommend having information about helpful local resources. When you're contacting these students, this can be a great way for them to learn more about things that might help them attain goals that they have. Maybe you can provide them information about programs or services in the community, any sort of information if they're looking for another job and they share that with you. Maybe those types of materials could be beneficial to give the students as they kind of approach life after school. And the other hope would be that by improving the reputation of the survey and the supports that come with it as a result of completing the data and getting high response rates, you might be encouraging other exiters, whether you know it or not, to complete the survey and contact you. One other thing to keep in mind is publicizing the survey effort. So making sure that people are aware it's going on, whether that maybe goes out in a newsletter or a social media post or some more broad communication. The more people are aware of it, the more likely they are to participate with and complete the survey. And then also think about how you might make plans for certain students or families that might require assistive technology. We have a lot of the documents translated as well as the online survey, but that might be something to check and see if the families or the student need, or any other supports that really encourage people to feel they can participate on the survey. And then again, plan strategically about when students are going to be contacted. And then revise those times. If former students are difficult to reach at certain days or certain times, you may need to adjust what those days are and the times are that you contact the students. All right, so this is just going to be a recap of some of the evidence-based practices to improve response rates. We've touched on a lot of these. I don't want to go through them all and read them to you, but just to summarize, again, that key is ensuring that you have contact information before students leave. So that's something, if you're struggling to get that information when you think about planning for future years, because this is an annual survey that will be completed, do think about how you're getting relevant contact information from your seniors before they exit so that you can reach them after. You can also consider reaching out to the family for assistance. So if you're really struggling to get in contact with a student, but you have the family information, they can complete the survey on the student's behalf. So that is an option to explore. One of the other pieces that we also recommend is having that multiple ways of outreach at various times of day, various days a week. Again, repeating that, but because it is so important. But I think ultimately the takeaway is the last bullet on the right, which is persistence is key. It may not be easy to always get in contact with everyone on the list, but by trying to constantly engage with families and students, there's an increased likelihood that you'll get the response from that group, and then you'll have more confidence in the data. All right, and with that, I think I'm turning things over to you, Kristen.
Thank you so much, Rachel. I think that there's a lot of information in all of this. And so again, I'm going to repeat what I said at the beginning. This is being recorded. We will post the entire webinar on our Indicator 14 webpage. And we will also post the slides for anyone who doesn't want to listen to us talk, which is perfectly fine. And again, those should be up sometime over the next couple of weeks. I think what I'll probably do now is ask folks to put your questions in the Q&A, and Rachel and I can answer a couple of your questions. Anything that comes up that has come up so far, and we'll try to get a few more of those questions answered. The thing I also do, I want to correct something slightly, a little bit that Rachel said earlier. When we've asked the districts who want to receive the weekly updates or the bi-weekly updates with the numbers of exiters who've actually filled in the survey and which ones. We're going to ask if you're asking to be added to that list, that is the only list you're being added to. DESE itself prefers to communicate with special ed directors. So any of the mass mail ship communications, as I said at the beginning, will only go out to special ed directors. So we're asking that if there are other people in the district that need to get that information, those will be the big general information. There'll be the reminders, those kind of things. We'll of course won't set any kind of SACIDs or any updates on how many exiters or anything specific to a district out via MailChimp. Those are just the bigger emails that go out from everyone. So I just want to make that clear to everybody that we won't be sending all of the communications if you ask to be added to a certain list. Those are all just done you're only asking for your name to be added or other people to be added to the updates, the exiter updates lists, not the full DESE communications. Sorry, that's a lot to explain. So let me take a look quickly at the Q&A and the kind of questions that have come in.